Hey guys, welcome back to the Arthritis Podcast, official podcast of digital and creative media works, where each week we take something from pop culture and try to break it down to better understand it. My name is David.
Hello, my name is Ben.
And we're a bit of a different setup for those of you watching this on the video stream.
We're slightly translated forward.
We're a little bit further forward in the studio, and to be honest, I don't hate it. I think it might be better framing.
Yeah.
We'll see how we go in the long run. But the reason that we're here and we've got headphones on is we're not talking to ourselves. We are joined by a special guest, Adam de Colabus. Damn it, I said Colabus.
That's right, isn't it?
Isn't that right, Adam?
It's close. It's de Colabus.
De Colabus.
Yeah,
and Adam is the author of upcoming book Caravan. Upcoming. How do you describe it to people when you're pitching them the novel?
Well, it depends. One of the easiest ways I describe it to them is I say, there's this guy from England who gets hired to go to the Sahara and take pictures of the people and of the caravan and of the desert. And it happens in the early 20s. And while he's there, he becomes really fascinated with the desert, and he's forced to make this decision between staying over there and going back to England and living the life that he wants to live.
Yeah, I've read it, thoroughly enjoyed it. There is some great action toward the middle and the end that it's really great. So it's highly recommend it. And when does that one come out? Just so that people might know where to find that one and when to look for it.
It's going to be coming out in early January. The original release date was going to be on December 20th, but we ran into some file problems with our manufacturer, and we've got to push the date just a little bit.
Can totally relate.
Bloody manufacturers.
Yeah, had the same problem with my book, so totally understand. Fabulous. So the reason that we've got you on today is your book's coming out in January, which is exciting, and we'll put some links and stuff to that into the show notes, and might talk about it briefly at the end, and then you and I are currently planning to do a kind of an in-depth interview about it. But the other reason is that this book seems like it was heavily inspired by Lawrence of Arabia, so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. No, Lawrence of Arabia definitely had a large effect on my writing of the book itself. Even while I was actually writing it and going it through, I just have Lawrence of Arabia playing in the background because I felt it just really influenced my train of thought. I felt like that is where the book needed to be, and it really pushed it into the right place.
Totally. No, I completely see that.
Did you just have the overture playing just on repeat as you wrote this book?
Just the soundtrack?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting now that I've seen the film again recently, having also read the book recently, I can kind of see some of the parallels, which is really interesting. And we'll kind of get into the summary in a minute, but I just want to get everyone's kind of first, because Ben, I don't think you'd seen this before, had you?
No, this is the first time I saw this film, yeah.
What'd you think of it? Coming into
well, I spent the first couple minutes going like, why is it just a black screen, until Laura correctly pointed out that this is a film from the 60s, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
They just play their overture for the first.
It's everyone can sit down in the cinema.
Yeah. And then I strapped myself in for 4 hours of watching this film and hearing the same theme over and over, which was a good 4 hours. It wasn't bad.
No. But it's long.
It's a long film. But yeah, no, I overall enjoyed it. There are some things that I was like, it's a bit weird. Yeah, this is a bit odd. But I think it comes from just it's a film from the 60s. And
yeah.
But I can definitely see why it's such a classic. It won a bajillion awards.
Yeah, it's super
So,
dope.
yeah,
I
enjoyed it.
It won 7 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, and a Golden Globe.
And a partridge and a pear tree.
Yeah, man. This is a highly decorated film. What did you think? Well, what is it you like the most about this film, Adam, and why are you drawn to it, especially on a repeat watching?
I'd have to say what I like about it the most is that, like any really good historical film or book, you can tell that there's just a level of realism that it's almost scary how real it is, because it's fantasized and everything, and things are exaggerated, but there's just a realism there that really connects with me.
Yeah, totally. And I think especially in the execution of the film itself, because it is an older film, a lot of the stuff that they do in the different scenes, they just actually had to do. It's got that kind of Star Wars texture to it, where everything feels very realistic. They had to, if they wanted to crash a car,
They had to crash
a fucking car. That kind of filmmaking always lends itself to that, I feel.
Yeah, they derailed a train because they needed a scene where they derail a train.
Which was amazing.
Yeah.
But you get one shot at that. If you fuck that up, that's an expensive mistake. Do you know what I mean?
Can't go back to the train store.
Yeah, you got to go back to the train store, man.
Get a new train, get a new rail.
Get a new rail.
Just to derail it.
Exactly. So we kind of touched on this, but it came out in 1962, and it's loosely based on the life of T.E. Lawrence, directed by David Lean and produced by Sam Spiegel. It was nominated for 10 Oscars at the 35th Academy Awards and won 7, including Best Picture, Best Director, and it also won 2 BAFTAs and a Golden Globe. Unless there's anything else anyone wants to say, I might just dive right into the summary and get us kicked off.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Wish me luck. It's a long one. Okay. Part 1 opens with Lawrence's death in a motorcycle accident in the year 1935. During a memorial service at St. Paul's, a reporter tries to learn about the remarkable, enigmatic fellow from those who were close to him, but ultimately struggles. We then join Lawrence during his time in World War I, where he is young and brash and quickly develops a reputation. Against General Murray's objections, Dryden from the Arab Bureau sends Lawrence to check on Prince Faisal's progress in his revolt against the Turks. Lawrence goes with a guide, Tafis, who is killed by Sheriff Ali for drinking from his well without permission. As his journey progresses, Lawrence meets Colonel Brighton, who orders Lawrence to keep his head down, make his assessment, and get the hell out. Lawrence, against orders again, almost immediately speaks with Faisal, and his candor draws the prince's interest. Colonel Brighton suggests Faisal retreat in the wake of a defeat, but Lawrence offers an alternate solution. A surprise attack, I don't know, I think it's Aqaba? A surprise attack of Aqaba to capture a port where the British could offload needed supplies. Due to its isolation, the town is heavily fortified against naval assaults, but more or less defenseless via land. Faisal approves a force of 50 men, led by Sheriff Ali, and along with orphans Dowd and Farah, Lawrence and co. cross the Nefud Desert. The desert is thought to be impassable by all, and during their journey, Gassim falls off his camel during the night, defeated by fatigue. Lawrence rides back to save him, and in the act, wins over Sheriff Ali, who then gives Lawrence Arab robes. During their travels, as they approach the Turks, Lawrence convinces a local Howitat tribe to turn against the Turks. Lawrence's plan is nearly foiled when one of Ali's men kills a member of the tribe due to a blood feud. Lawrence, without knowing who it is, announces he will execute the culprit himself. In his hopes to galvanize the alliance, he is dismayed to discover that the culprit was Gassim, the very man he saved. Nonetheless, Lawrence shoots Gassim. The next morning, the mission is a success as the tribe overruns the Turkish garrison. Lawrence rides for Cairo to inform Dryden and General Albany of the victory. During their trip back, Dowd finds his death in quicksand, and upon Lawrence's return, Lawrence is promoted to Major. When discussing his task with General Alabi, I can never say his name, Lawrence confesses he liked killing Gassim and that he is struggling with his choices. Albany brushes this aside, as well as rumors that the British have designs on Arabia. And that's kind of where part 1 ends. I need to take a quick breather. What did we think of part 1? Kind of when you lay it out like that.
Like part 1 is basically a film in itself. You know, you could end the film at the intermission, and it's like, okay,
it's still pretty satisfying.
Yeah, I think part 1 is very much, I would say, based on my very minor research, that it's probably the closest to reality in terms of what happened, this sort of the character that Lawrence is. Mm-hmm. So I think part 1 is really, really good, and it you know, just coming into the film, it sets up the second act.
Gives you such a solid foundation for understanding his character.
It's like it's its own film. So coming into the second act, it's like the sequel, the dark, gritty sequel where everything goes wrong. You know, it's a bit like that.
That's a good way of thinking of it, actually. Yeah, what did you think, Adam, of the first part?
I'd agree with Ben. I'd say that in the beginning there's definitely they definitely go overboard on the scenery.
Yes.
They play that overture as much as they can.
You know, I feel like they really wanted to drive the fact that they were in the desert in the beginning, and they did a really good job of showing how large it was, because you see some dunes. You're like, okay, I get the picture, dunes, and then you see these tiny little specks just appear, and you're like, holy cow, those are people.
Massive.
And they do it to you like 8 times. And by the end of it, you feel kind of traumatized. And I don't know.
I feel like I don't want to go outside after that part, because I'm like, what if it's the desert out there? Like,
every time they do a shot where they see someone sort of appear on the horizon where they're still just like they're a haze. They're basically still a mirage. I'm just astounded by that, because they would have actually had to send some dude
the fuck
good,
out,
like
10
10Ks out to get that shot.
And what kind of lenses are they wielding in 1962 where they can capture that kind of information?
Yeah,
like,
no, it's insane.
You know, it's some guy on like this old busted ass video camera, like with a giant telescopic lens, you know, trying to make that shot work.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, go. like how do you coordinate that? You know, like that to me,
insane.
It's amazing that they pull it off so many times.
Yeah.
And I would love to.
They probably got it from the people who were linked up with the space program.
Yeah. The guys at NASA were like, yeah, okay, go.
Yeah. Hey man, it was in the 60s.
That's
Who
a good
knows?
point.
You know, people know people.
1969 was the rocket, so who knows? You know, maybe they had some hookups. I don't know. Okay, let me get into part 2, because part 2 is when shit gets real, folks. Okay, part 2 opens with Lawrence in the midst of a guerrilla war against the Turks, foiling their plans at every opportunity. War correspondent Jackson Bentley reports Lawrence's quote-unquote heroics and quickly makes him famous back home. During a raid, Farah is injured badly, and Lawrence kills him out of mercy rather than see him be tortured. Later, when scouting the city of Dara with Ali, he and a group of residents are taken to the Turkish Bay. Lawrence is beaten, stripped, prodded, and flogged, then thrown into the streets. Lawrence returns to headquarters visibly shaken and feels like he doesn't fit in anymore. General Albany convinces Lawrence to partake in a push on Damascus, and in the end, Lawrence goes, accompanied by a fighting force more interested in coin than the Arab cause. A group of Turkish soldiers is riding away, ones who have slaughtered the residents of Tafas, and one of Lawrence's men demands they attack, and rides out alone only to be murdered. Lawrence takes up the man's battle cry, and they butcher the Turks. Lawrence immediately regrets this decision, but his men take Damascus ahead of the general's forces. Despite Lawrence's best efforts, the Arab Administrative Council bicker and fight and fail to manage the city now that they have it, ultimately and disappointingly leaving it largely to the British to manage. Lawrence is once again promoted, this time to colonel, and is immediately ordered back to Britain. Lawrence leaves the city, and his automobile is passed by a motorcyclist who leaves a trail of dust in his wake. Credits. It's a fucking dark part 2, man.
When you explain it, it seems like part 2 is a lot shorter when you explain it like that. It's
well,
about
less
the same,
happens,
like,
yeah. It's much more about like the feelings about like what's happening, rather where I think part 1 is like about the events that are recurring, whereas part 2 is like the way that Lawrence is dealing with what's happening around him. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that kind of that halfway pivot where it's like, okay, now it's going to be really like not dark. I mean, because it is fucking dark, but like it's more so that they took the building blocks of Act 1, which is all of this expositional information, and they really injected into this kind of more part 2 to me feels a bit more like an Indiana Jones, but like if it was also Hurt Locker. Like it's got that kind of it's a bit more like, I don't know, part 1's very much like a desert trip. It's like a road trip, whereas part 2 very much feels like this is the, like, you go and do a job and it goes terribly wrong and then you come back home kind of thing. I don't know. It's interesting, especially given what we know about T. Lawrence's life and the way that he kind of reported that as well. Because there is a big discussion about this film and like maybe that it twists history in a way that is maybe not very helpful for anyone involved. This guy, biographer Michael Corder, was a big refuter of this, and you know he had this big kind of argument with a few people. And there's a quote that I have from him, which is he says, and I quote, "The object was to produce not a faithful docudrama that would educate the audience, but a hit picture," which I totally agree with. Like there's stuff in this that probably didn't happen. Which is interesting. Like, is that something that when you go back through and you look at this stuff, Adam, like, is that something that you're aware of, like trying to delineate between what the good story is, well, what's a good story to tell, and like historical accuracy, like especially because you played around in that historical fiction space, like is that something that you're kind of always thinking about with films like this and with your book?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that they had their, what do you call it? They had their objectives set correctly by deciding to go a little bit off the books and create a hit picture because, well, it worked for them, one. And two, I think that anything, you know, obviously if you're not bending the rules crazily, because then you're just making a movie, anything that helps make a good picture or make a good book, I say go ahead and put it in there. And, you know, like even one of the big historical inaccuracies that they had was that Lawrence of Arabia T.E. Lawrence actually didn't like killing at all. When he killed Gassim, there are reports of him actually feeling very shooken up about it, and a lot of people who talked to the directors and people who were getting information about the film were very shocked that they portrayed him that way.
I don't know, like toward the middle of that first part, he's kind of like pretty savage, like he's kind of into it, you know.
Yeah.
But they even twisted some other stuff. Like apparently in real life, Lawrence and Allenby were like like they admired each other. Like at his funeral, Allenby said, and I quote, "I have lost a good friend and a valued comrade. Lawrence was under my command, but after acquainting him with my strategical plan, I gave him a free hand. His cooperation was marked by the utmost loyalty, and I never had anything but praise for his work, which indeed was invaluable throughout our campaign." So, like, they seem like good buds, but the film makes them out to be this kind of weird, standoffish, like, it's such a weird relationship.
Yeah, and I think coming back to sort of making a good story, they've taken a period of history which, World War One. There's a lot of films that have kind of taken that period of time and sort of trying to weave stories in and out of it. This is World War Two, but like another example is like Saving Private Ryan. Like another sort of big, semi-realistic historical action. It's more of an action flick though. Yeah. Whereas that was based on World War Two, and they were like, let's take a story that we want to tell and sort of just kind of plonk it in this time period during World War Two. I think this film is kind of interesting where they've taken World War One, which was such a different war. Like they're very different wars. Yeah. They do touch on it in this film where they sort of at the start where the Turks, or I believe the Turks are like gunning and bombing the Arab camp, and they're just like, we're not used to used to this kind of weaponry. They're trying to chase them down with their bloody scimitars on horses.
It's a totally different game.
Yeah, and I think they take that aspect of World War One and they put it into the story, the idea of just like, we want guns. And it's like, well, we can give you rifles. It's like, no, we want guns.
Yeah, you misunderstood.
Like, we want those guns. And it's like that difference in technology then kind of, for one, it was a big drive behind the Arab revolt in the first place.
Yeah.
But they kind of use it to this advantage where, you may have guns, you may have this, but we have Lawrence of Arabia. We have this godlike figure who is kind of, they even allude him to Moses in the film.
Yeah.
And he kind of acts a little bit like a Moses character.
He's like a dressed down prophet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool though, because I think there's this interesting intersection. We'll get to it with my meta reading at the end, but there's an interesting intersection of this kind of storytelling where it's like the kind of this sprawling Arab adventure, which we've seen a lot of kind of pre-World War One, especially like when the Franz Ferdinand, just before he died, there was like a bunch of books that came out that were very similar, because I think after World War One, people were really enwrapped with these ideas. But there's something to this weird like intersection of like Western style storytelling. I'm talking like Westerns, like cowboy Westerns, and like the Japanese samurai stuff. And this kind of has a mix of all of that, where it's like this kind of, you have the sprawling adventure across a desert, but you also have the kind of the gunslinger, samurai, Moses, prophet person in the middle of it. Like, it's kind of interesting. I don't know. It's something that I was thinking about a lot when I was going back and making notes. Because I was trying to work out what role Lawrence is trying to play in this story. Because in the first act, he definitely becomes that kind of the leader and the kind of the Moses person who's going to lead them to victory or whatever. Yeah. But in the second part, it's like, I don't know, what do you take that to mean, Adam? Where like, in the second half, he's just like kind of, they flip that on its head, Yeah,
you put it really well. He definitely goes savage in the second half. And what's something that I noticed, and I made a note of it, is that at the beginning of it, we see Sheriff Ali, he kills Lawrence of Arabia's guide. And we see this kind of power structure of who's showing mercy and who's more lenient, who values saving lives more. And as the film goes on, we see Sheriff Ali go down, and we see Lawrence of Arabia go up on who's more willing to take lives. And I thought that was really, really interesting, just as a component of the film.
I hadn't thought of that. It's an interesting foil, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because the whole time through the film, I was aware of like, he killed this guy at the start of the film, this and that and the other. But it's interesting that the reasoning for Ali to kill his guide is it's more of a there's a reason he took my water without he knows
There's
that
a
he shouldn't have done
justification.
this. He also ran for a gun. It was there's an argument of self-defense.
Yeah.
Whereas sort of, and in particular during the when Lawrence is attacking the Turkish caravan that's running the stragglers.
Yeah.
That's
just
that scene that's really just like that's like a blood.
It's hard to watch.
Yeah, like that. It's quite different.
Yeah.
He's he's gone off the deep end at that point.
Yeah.
And then I like that they reward him and send him back to England for that. Like there's something to,
I took in this film, I took the promotion to general as more of a like a protection for Lawrence,
to save him from himself.
Well, he says, "I'm promoting you to general. You're going home, but now because you're a general, you get your own private coach."
Yeah.
Whereas if he was still a major, he would be with everyone else, and he would have thought, probably let's just give him his own bed.
Yeah, that's
just keep him a bit separate from everyone else for now.
Yeah, well, I mean, because he even expresses that he kind of feels like he doesn't fit in anymore.
Yeah,
which is okay. So I don't know if you've read the book that this is, not the book, the autobiography that this is based on, Adam. The 7 Pillars of Wisdom.
No,
it's
I haven't.
fucking wild. Like, so basically the book is called 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and it was T. Lawrence writing about his own life. And the title of the book comes from this part in Proverbs, because of course it does. And the section that it gets its name from is quote, "Wisdom hath builded her house, she hath hewn out her 7 pillars," end quote. And the book is a huge part of what they've based the film on. But a lot of the book is just T. Lawrence eyewitness testimonying about his life, and it's great delving into the historical, like, kind of refutes of this book. And there was this historian, Charles Hill, who said, quote, "A novel traveling under the cover of autobiography is all there is in this," which is basically like T. Lawrence has just lied about his life.
Wow.
And then they based the film on it. So it's these two levels of abstraction away from what really happened.
Right.
And so that's why, Lawrence's estate were like upset with the film, because it depicted him as like this kind of blood-soaked lunatic toward the second part. But like, to be honest, Lawrence lied about his own life, so there's no one can really confirm a lot of the details properly. Like, they can they go, "Oh, we know he was in this place, so we can confirm that something happened here." But what he actually did, we have no idea. So it's, I don't know, like, you can talk about historical text. How do you know what actually happened? Like, that's kind of cool, I think.
Well, I thought there was an interesting element with the reporter, because a lot of the public image of T. Lawrence was built up by this reporter who was following him around and sort of documenting everything he was doing. And then this film almost kind of follows that same line of just like, at least in the first act, of like, look how much of a hero Lawrence is and look how great he is. But then the character of the character himself, who's playing the reporter, he's also in the film following Lawrence around,
It's
reporting
weird.
back home how much of a hero he is, and then slightly his downfall a little bit.
It's almost like the first part is you're viewing it from the retelling of a reporter.
Yeah, the first act is like, this is what the reporter has been telling people, and then the second act
is what really
is
happened.
what sort of really happened, or what Lawrence is. It's definitely
That's interesting.
like built in Lawrence's perspective.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Man, that adds like another layer.
Well,
too.
especially because this film has been like refuted by a lot of people, and you kind of have to go, okay, well then,
first bit's
what
propaganda.
perspective? Yeah, like where, because the acts are so different. Like there is a line literally drawn in the middle of this film of a good 2 minutes of nothing, where it's like, you, from a film perspective, there's always a difference between the first act and the second act, especially when you have an intermission.
But in this case, like, that's so fucking interesting. Like it's so deliberate that they put that break in.
Yeah.
Like that's. Yeah.
I mean, you make a choice to make.
They're like,
4
now
hours.
here's what really happened.
Here's now let's take off the rose-tinted glasses and let's see the massacre kind of thing.
Yeah.
Man, that's especially like, because this is a weird. Also, it's worth noting that the book, when Lawrence was working on it, he was literally bankrupt and he wrote, this guy's a fucking lunatic. He wrote like this several million word manuscript, and no one was going to read it, and his friends convinced him as he was like running out of money, they were like, you need
this
to
more.
abridge this and make it shorter and make it more accessible. And so the book that came out isn't even close to like the actual original text, which is out there somewhere. But it's weird then if you think about that delineation, because it's clearly trying to say something about the way that we view war in film and the way that we've like kind of we're able to look back with this kind of propagandist lens and say, oh, well, this guy's, this hero. But then if you look at the truth of what actually happened, it's not even condoning that either, because it seems like the outcome is that he gets to go home and he's kind of okay for the time being.
I mean, like, war in general is, for a lot of people, it's just a job. Yesterday I watched They Shall Not Grow Old, which is a fantastic documentary. I'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
And the perspective, and these were British soldiers on the Western Front, which is very different to what this was.
Yeah.
But same time period. For a lot of them, it was just a job.
Yeah.
They went and, they didn't really want to fight. They were just kind of like, they had this idea of, well, we got to go to war.
Yeah. Got to get
we
paid.
may as well.
Yeah.
There was a story in the documentary about in Britain, right when the war was sort of announced, this football team was playing with a German team that had flown in internationally, and they were sitting around the table having dinner, and then someone ran in and said, "We're at war with Germany," and they sort of looked around and they went, "Yeah, the war begins tomorrow."
Yeah,
and for a lot of these people, and yeah, it was just a job.
Yeah, which
whereas for the in Lawrence of Arabia, the Arab Revolt, that was definitely that for them, that was more than just a job.
It was about ideals, and it was about making a...
For the Turks, an argument could be made that was their job. They were, because they were very much a modernized military at that point.
You can see that in the second act, where the group that he gets commissioned to go with him are basically just mercenaries.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first act, it's like people that are believing in a political cause.
And he's convincing them to go along with them.
Which then begs the question, if we're to take the first act as the propagandist retelling, in reality, was he not like this leader, but they were just paid? Like, like is that them idealizing that? Maybe, I don't know. It's
Yeah, that's an interesting take.
I didn't realize I had that opinion, but there you go. I just learned I do. That's that's kind of interesting too, because then that also implies that as you get through the bulk of this story, because there's some narrative elements in this that don't make any fucking sense in real life. Like Sheriff Ali's character, whilst one of my favorites in the story, as you pointed out, which is a cool thing, he's like the foil for Lawrence. But like, if they truly went on that trajectory, Ali would just like probably not have a job, because his job is to go out there and make sure that the right people get killed.
Right.
And as the story goes on, he's less hesitant to kill. Like, it's kind of... That probably wouldn't hold up in like a, in a work environment, as Ben pointed out, like they're there to do a job. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Do we have any like kind of closing thoughts on the narrative as a whole before I get into my kind of meta reading and probably ruin this quite nice film?
I do have one. I gotta say that Sharif's Ari Sharif's entry by getting a headshot from a camel
quite impressive.
Is like what an entry.
what a fucking way to come in.
Well, that's a very
it's like you know how I'm gonna get introduced. Headshot from.
That's
a camel.
almost very like Western cowboy as well.
That's
the sheriff comes in and shoots, or he shoots the gun out of the guy's hand.
Yeah,
it's very.
You know what?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Go.
No,
keep on going.
it's very like idealistic. It's just like, wow, what a great shot. He's like, yeah, he's a cracking shot with that iron on his hip. It's that kind of like ridiculous, probably not real, but it looks good on film kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I felt like throughout the film there was definitely, and I don't know how I was picking this up, because this has to be like probably the 8th time I've seen this film. There's definitely just the slightest touch of a Western movie aspect, because when Lawrence of Arabia and one of the two orphans that he has with him, when they finally cross the Sinai Desert and they reach the canal, the abandoned building that they reach almost looks like a Spanish mission in like a cowboy movie.
That kind of does.
Yeah.
Like I could see a gunfight just going down.
A big Mexican standoff.
Yeah. That would be horrible if they just walked on the set of a Mexican standoff. They're like, "Hey guys, we're shooting an Arabian movie. Get out of here,
man."
Yeah, you just see guys in sombreros.
That's it. The guys in fucking ponchos hoofing it out of there. That'd be fucking great. Although I wonder too if that's not a product of, because like when they filmed this, they did a lot of it on location, but then some of it they just went back to America and they were like, let's find a desert. Yeah. So I think there is an element of that which works so well because it's like, especially thinking about that lens of like, is it propaganda? Did it really happen? Like, yeah, of course you would change details to make it more American and more like Western because that's how you'd retell it if you were like an English person who came back.
Everyone speaks English.
Yeah, that's exactly
Right.
T.D. Lawrence's kind of perspective on this, I feel. The Western stuff, there's almost like a whole podcast in that of itself, deconstructing like which elements they've borrowed from kind of which genres and how that is kind of it's not even a pastiche, but it's like a kind of Frankenstein.
Lawrence, the only gun he uses is a pistol, whereas everyone else uses rifles.
Yeah.
And the pistol is actually the same pistol, despite in the film being a different pistol. It's weird. It's the same type of pistol, but it constantly gets thrown away or given to other characters or just kind of discarded.
But you can kind of always conjure the same type of pistol.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he's sort of, if you sort of look at Westerners, the pistol is the gun of the West.
Yeah.
Whereas the rifle was, in World War One, the rifle was the soldier's weapon.
Yeah, it was the mercenary soldier's tool, whereas the pistol is definitely the cowboy's equipment.
Yeah.
Which, man, this film's got a lot going on, man.
Yeah.
All right, if y'all are ready, I might get into my meta reading.
Settle in for this one.
I'm curious to see what you think of this, Adam, because I was cooking this up when we were talking about initially doing this episode, because I was deep into the Arabian Nights stuff and kind of didn't come back from that deep well of reading. So obviously this film is set in it's set around the Arabian tropes and like kind of grandfathers in a lot of the stuff from 1001 Nights, which for those of you who don't know is a series of folktales framed within the ruler of Sahiyar and his wife Sherry is Dad's narrative. I can't say her name.
Scheherazade
sounds right, yeah. And it's got like a really strong Indian influence in it. It's also like one of the first instances in history of a framed story where like people are reporting things back. And it was developed in the night stories from Tantro. I'm not going to try to even say these names, but it's a story in 1000 Nights where it's these concubines telling the king these stories to kind of get his favor and to keep him interested in them because each concubine is like really struggling to be like the leader of the pack kind of thing. So they tell him these stories and it's these framed narratives in the same way that this story, like Lawrence of Arabia, is kind of a framed story in that you've got the reporter who's gathering the information after his death, and then even in the second, the second film is very much less a framed story, the second part rather.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it kind of used that trope. One of the key elements of the Nights stories is that it was one of the first bigger kind of folktale representations to feature really strong visualization, particularly like mimetic representation of gestures and stuff and dialogue that actually feels like people talking. I don't know if you all have read any stories before 1000 Nights, but they're fucking impossible. Everyone is like soliloquying and shit. Like,
right.
It's all like Greek, high theater where it's like, good morrow, sir, forthcoming when? You're like, what the fuck are they saying? Whereas like people talk like people in Nights. And I think the book... So here's where my meta reading kind of comes into that. So because it kind of has that lifelike quality to it, and so does the film. The problem is the film is based off a book that is not that accurate, and they even take the facts from the book that isn't accurate and then make them less accurate. But in doing so, they use the dramatic devices to make it feel more lifelike by having people talk like people and behave like people. So it's almost like in Lawrence's attempt to imitate his own life events in this book, the film then doubles down and imitates Lawrence's imitation by using this tool set from something that Lawrence was drawing on in the first place for inspiration. So it's this weird kind of layered cake of different things coming together to form the kind of influences that sit within Lawrence of Arabia. And I think that's where, like, and I'm gonna hit you with it now, so, put your seatbelts on, boys. The film captures the quintessential thematic overture of every single story in the Nights. So in 1000 Arabian Nights, almost every single story has this thing that happens where it starts with an affectation of destiny or like grandeur, where in some way, in a regular situation, destiny intervenes and it creates these like anomalous events that keep getting more and more strange as the story goes on. And then by the time the story ends, everything is back to normal. That's like how every 1 in 1,000 story happens in the Knights. And by the same, but in the same token, Lawrence of Arabia, starts with quite a plain setting where it's like, oh, you're at this funeral, it's like England, and then you go to this kind of mystical journey across the desert where it's like kind of this Western Arabian Indian influence. But then by the end of it, and he has this exhilarating journey, and he touches, what Lacan would call the real, and he goes to Arabia and connects with his true self, and they capture the port and they have this amazing adventure. But ultimately, like, he finds himself back in normality in a car on the way to home. And his death in a motorcycle accident is not heroic. It's not valor. It's not like this valorization. There's no destiny. He doesn't die as like this martyr in the war. It's just a crappy accident on the road. And I think that kind of thematic overture of you go from normalcy to this kind of destiny-driven adventure back to normalcy. Like, I don't think it's any accident that Lawrence's story in his book that was then adapted to the film kind of shares that that kind of thematic tune, and I think it's why it feels so genuinely not Arab or Indian in a sense, but it feels genuinely like it's thematically linked to those stories for me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it when I was watching it this time.
Yeah, well, that layering is interesting because it almost comes out like a modernization of folktale, which we're actually seeing a lot of like nowadays with stuff like Moana and Coco. Disney is doing it pretty much exclusively.
Yeah.
Where it's like, let's take a fairly sort of niche kind of like culture that has existed for ages and has always existed, and let's boil it down and look at elements of it that are interesting, and then like develop a story from it. So like Moana was really just let's look at Polynesian culture and let's make something quite spectacular. To be honest, I thought Moana was great.
That's great.
But where this film it takes that Arabian Nights kind of those aspects and goes, okay, and through Lawrence's retelling of his story, which again sort of has those influences, it sort of modernized is in the 60s, but whatever. It modernizes it and sort of, but at the same time, it adds so much like Western onto it just because of being in the 60s, and every Arab character is actually a white dude with a tan and a
kind of
and there's definitely a sign of the times, but I think it's quite interesting how it has so many layers, but it still comes out as being coherent and interesting. It's not just like a jumbled mess of different stereotypes.
Ideas. Yeah, which a lot of stuff at that time was.
Yeah. It's like, I think this one it's okay in terms of how it handles the fact that it's a completely non-Western culture.
There's nothing terribly egregious in it.
No. I think and even some of the dialogue where they sort of talk about, Lawrence has gone savage. Yeah, like nowadays you're like,
shouldn't use the
that's
S-word
a bit
for that
rough.
one.
But they would have said that. Like, that's what would have been said in World War One. And in the 60s, they were still like, this is fine.
Right, it's like watching a Tarantino film and everyone talks like whatever time period they're from. It's like, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you watch like The Hateful Eight or Django Unchained.
Yeah. People talk a certain way. Yeah.
You're like, oh, this is rough, but it's what it was.
Yeah, totally. Do you have any kind of thoughts on the on my deep well into insanity with the meta reading there, Adam? I don't know if is that stuff you ever kind of thought about?
Actually I do got some thoughts, and something that I love that you mentioned is how they weave in the idea of destiny into the story. You could definitely see that quite evidently throughout the movie. You could see this idea that Lawrence of Arabia feels that he's destined to lead the Arab revolt, and it gets to the point where he's living on the literal edge and he's taking risks that he doesn't need to take because he there's just this cycle of he goes to take an action, he gets rewarded for it, and he thinks he's destined, and then he takes a bigger action, gets rewarded for it, and then thinks he's destined, and that just leads to him, nearly dying so many times. And like for real, like just crossing the desert and just the way that they show it, watching that movie just makes me feel dry, physically, like I'm turning into a raisin. but back to it, like the destiny part of it. It's really huge because I like what they say when I think the guy's name is Gassim, when he falls off his camel and he's left behind. there's this discussion that goes around like, okay, should he go back? Should he go get him? And the phrase "it is written" is thrown around, and I like that Lawrence of Arabia says, certain things are written, but it's written in here, and he taps the side of his head. I thought that was really interesting because it was about him, in a sense, making his own destiny.
Right. Okay.
But the irony of that is that then when they finally get all the way to Aqaba, he has to, it does seem destined that he has to kill the guy that he saved.
Huh. I hadn't thought of that. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a kind of folds back in on itself. Yeah.
Well, even in the second act when they're attacking the Turkish group, it's really interesting where you can see, and this is really kudos to the actor playing Lawrence. I thought he was amazing in this film, but you could see that he wants to attack them. Like, he wants to attack these Turkish people because he sort of just has this drive. And when one of his men runs off and chases him, he lets him go. And I sort of saw that as like he's waiting for an excuse. He's waiting for a reason to attack these Turkish stragglers. And when they shoot, the guy who's attacking them, he's like, awesome, let's go. Like, it's like a reason. He's like, he takes up the battle cry. You can, and again, you watch that scene again, you can see it in his face where like he dies and he sort of, it's like a relief. It's like a relief. He's like, now I have it. Now I have a reason. Now I have an excuse to attack this.
Yeah. Because again, like if we're talking about that destiny aspect, if someone like that's part of that same kind of value system where it's like if someone attacks and kills one of your own, you must go back and
because I think it's indicative that in the second act he isn't as in control in his own destiny as he thinks he is.
Yeah.
Whereas in the start he's quite comfortable going off the beaten path and making decisions.
Well, just like going against direct orders and stuff like that. Yeah.
But then later on, he's still going against orders per se, but he's kind of just going with the flow. He's
tied to like
what he's got an idea of just Damascus.
Yeah. He's like if we just get there, that's all. Fine. Yeah. It'll be fine. And that's There's something to that as well, where the whole film, it feels like, and like I was trying to think about what it is about this film that whenever I watch it I always get something else from it. Like last time I watched it before this instance, like I learned a lot about like the way that they kind of framed the story with the kind of Western genre stuff. But this time, like I came at it with a different perspective where I was like, okay, what about this kind of, where does it get the thematic kind of drivers from? And why does it feel so authentically its own thing, but at the same time inspired by all of these different tales and different influences? And it's interesting to me that a film made in the 60s like this, a lot of stuff doesn't age super well, because even though the sets and stuff might still hold up, the way that they deal with thematic stuff in older films tends to be a bit like clunky and not good. But this film is so subtle, I think, with a lot of its like kind of subtext especially, that every time I watch it I just get something different. And that's not something I say a lot about film. I don't think,
like the dialogue and sort of like the framing of dialogue in this film is very much like older kind of film. Like, characters will just kind of appear and then you'll figure out 2 scenes later who they are. Like stuff like that, which is very much just like they haven't caught up to modern sort of film, like storyboarding and stuff like that. But, it's stuff like the soundtrack, like this film literally set the bar of this is how you do Arabia.
The soundtrack fucks hard.
And it's the cinematography and the landscapes, like it's all that stuff set the bar.
Well, that was where a lot of the Star Wars imagery comes from.
Yeah,
it was like that plus the spaghetti westerns. Yeah, it's interesting. We kind of have to wrap up because we're running over. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts that you want to add in, Adam, before we move forward?
Any closing thoughts? It's definitely an amazing movie. It's huge in like the length and like the soundtrack. Like it definitely goes hard. The extras and everything. I'd say it's an amazing movie.
Completely agree.
I always knew this film existed because you hear it everywhere, but I never really watched it because I was like, whatever, Lawrence of Arabia, and I never really, then when I saw it was 4 hours, I was like, okay, this is a film, and then
it's gonna be a journey.
You sit down, and I think if you haven't seen it, it's worth put aside in the evening, have dinner during the intermission. That's what we did. It was fantastic. Like make an event of it.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, like if you sort of make an event of it as if it was in a cinema, and like nowadays with how big TVs are and how easy it is to get a really good experience at home, you can really experience this film as it would have been in the 60s, and it's something. Yeah,
Totally.
I would, if anywhere did like a proper cinema screening of this with the intermission and the
so good
and the drinks bar and everything,
that would be crazy.
we would
absolutely
that
would be amazing.
Yeah. That'd be good. We'd fly Adam over and we could hang out and enjoy it. Yeah, man, totally. I think you both summarized kind of my thoughts in general. I guess the only other thing that I wanted to add as we kind of wrap up is that I think sometimes when you look at older films, there's a tendency to have like this kind of rose-tinted like, well, we have to hold them to the standard of their time, not the standard of today. But when you find a film like this that just kind of holds up because it was so well, it's so well developed, like it's a very developed story. It feels very matured, and like it kind of is it's at a point in its development cycle where like it doesn't feel like a lot of older stuff where they went, oh, we'll just make it good enough for people today. They went, we're gonna make something that is gonna last and really like endure. And I think it's a testament to all the people involved, and it's a testament to how weird T. Lawrence's life was, that you can take this book that was fairly inaccurate about his life, craft it into a story which isn't really based on the book as much as it could be, and then at the end of it still have this coherent, driven story with all of these interesting thematic influences and different drivers. And I don't know, it's always a joy to go back to something this good. And it's a film that I think, if you watch it once every 2 or 3 years, you would get something totally different from it because you're a different person at a different place and time. So I'm definitely gonna revisit this as time goes on. But I think that's it for the main portion of our show. So to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to quickly get a plug in for your book, Adam. So where can people find Caravan when it's coming out? What's the best place to point them to?
Best place to find it would be on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles, and any bookstore you can find it. Basically anywhere you can find it, even on ebook.
Totally.
In ebook form, you can find it. Kindle, iBooks, all that stuff.
Excellent.
Check it out.
I'll pop a link in the show notes for that, so everyone can find that one.
Yeah, sure thing. I'll send one over. Best place you can get it for the best price would be at my blog, Third Lion Stories. Me and a couple authors throw up some short stories for free. Check it out. That's where it's going to be at, and that's where it's going to be at for the best price.
Excellent. We'll definitely check it out. We're just going to do our plugs, but I feel like we're already like nearly at 50 minutes. We don't have to do our plugs, but you'll already know where to buy my book. And you can get involved with that. We just got these new mugs that have come out. Adam, you can't see it, but I'm showing the camera. We've got new branding mugs.
We have merch.
So you can go get those. They're good, man. Nice and pink, so you can grab those. They'll deliver in time for Christmas. So get one for your nan, get one for yourself, get one for your cat. Just buy a handful of them, man. So check those out. If you want to support us directly, patreon.com/DCMworks. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, Adam. It's been a pleasure.
It's been awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me on, bro.
And we'll be catching up and doing a sort of an in-depth interview about your book at some point as well. Maybe more towards when it's coming out. So keep an eye out for that as well if you enjoyed this one. And maybe in the future we'll have you on for some other stuff if you're interested, because I feel like I had a good time. And thanks for stopping by.
Thanks.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. Love to be on again.
All right. Well, if you want to follow us individually, I'm at DCM I Hate Pie.
I'm at Literal Citrus.
Do you have a Twitter handle, Adam?
Yeah. I'm at Adam DeColibus, just at Twitter and Facebook. Excellent. And all that stuff. Just
cool. Get on board. And otherwise, we'll see you guys next week.